During the bitter winter of 1872, deep in the isolated hills of rural Tennessee, a 4-year-old child was found alive inside a room that had been completely sealed for 17 days. The door had been nailed shut from the outside, and the windows were boarded up and covered with thick fabric to block out both light and air. When the county constable finally forced the door open, he braced himself for a grim discovery. Instead, he saw the child sitting calmly on the wooden floor, gently humming an unfamiliar tune, one no one in the region had ever heard before. There was no food in the room, no water, no indication that anyone had come or gone. For more than a century, the official records of that investigation were kept locked away in a cabinet at the Rutherford County Courthouse, sealed from public view. Tonight, we are uncovering what those long-hidden documents actually revealed. But before we step into the mystery of the Harrove farmhouse and the child who survived against all odds, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. And tell us in the comments which state you're watching from. We love seeing where our viewers are joining us from. Now, let's uncover what really happened on that remote Tennessee farm. The events that unfolded at the Harrove property would later be debated in hushed conversations across 3 counties, always ending with the same unanswerable question. How? Tennessee in 1872 was a state still bearing the scars of war and Reconstruction. 7 years had passed since the Confederacy's surrender, but the wounds ran deeper than any battlefield grave. In the rural regions south of Nashville, life had settled into an uneasy rhythm. Farms struggled to find laborers, families mourned sons who never returned, and communities that had once thrived now held together with fraying threads of necessity and stubborn pride. The Harrove farm sat 12 miles outside Murfreesboro, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that turned to mud soup every time it rained. The property had been in the family since before Tennessee achieved statehood, passed down through 4 generations of Harrows who worked the same red clay soil their great-grandfather had cleared by hand. By 1872, only 2 members of the family remained. Nathaniel Harrove, a widower approaching 60 with hands twisted by arthritis, and his daughter-in-law Margaret, a woman of 32 whose husband had died at Shiloh. Margaret Hargrove was known throughout the county as a woman who kept to herself. She had arrived in Rutherford County in 1863 as a war bride, heavily pregnant, speaking with an accent that marked her as coming from somewhere far north. When her husband fell at Shiloh just months after their marriage, she had nowhere else to go. Nathaniel, grief-stricken over his son's death, had taken her in without question. She gave birth to a boy she named Samuel, and for 9 years, the 3 of them had maintained a quiet, isolated existence on the farm. Neighbors rarely visited. The Harroves purchased supplies in town only when absolutely necessary, and Margaret, in particular, seemed to avoid any social interaction. The few people who had occasion to see young Samuel described him as unusually silent for a child his age, pale, thin, with large dark eyes that seemed to watch everything, but expressed nothing. That boy never cried. Eliza Tuttle, who ran the general store in Murfreesboro, would later tell investigators, not once in all the times his mother brought him to town. Most children that age are running around, getting into everything, making noise. That one just stood beside her, perfectly still, like he'd been carved from soap. The farm itself was unremarkable. A 2-story farmhouse with a sagging porch, a barn that needed repairs, 40 acres of land that Nathaniel could no longer properly maintain. The house had been built in the 1790s, expanded over the decades, and now showed its age in settling foundations and warped floorboards. The upper floor contained 4 bedrooms, though only 2 were in regular use. One of the unused rooms at the far end of the hallway had been sealed shut years earlier after a section of the roof had leaked badly, damaging the floor. Nathaniel had nailed the door shut and told Margaret never to bother with it. The repairs would cost more than he could afford. Life on the Harrove farm followed a predictable pattern. Nathaniel rose before dawn to tend the animals. Margaret maintained the house, prepared meals, and watched over Samuel with an intensity that some found unsettling. The boy attended school irregularly. The schoolhouse was 8 miles away, and Margaret cited the distance and the boy's frequent illnesses as reasons for his absences. Everything changed on the morning of January 14, 1872. Nathaniel Harrove woke that morning to find the house unnaturally quiet. At 60 years old, he had become a creature of routine, and his body registered the wrongness before his mind fully grasped it. No sounds came from the kitchen, no smell of coffee. The fire in the stove, which Margaret always rekindled at first light, had gone cold. He found her on the floor of the kitchen, collapsed beside the table. Her skin was ice cold to the touch, her lips blue. Nathaniel, who had seen death on his own father's face years before, knew immediately that she was gone. There were no visible injuries, no signs of struggle. Her hands were clasped loosely at her stomach, and her eyes were partially open, staring at nothing. Panic seized him. Then, not for Margaret, but for Samuel. He called the boy's name as he climbed the stairs, his arthritic knees protesting every step. Samuel's small bedroom was empty, the bed neatly made. Nathaniel checked the other rooms, then went back downstairs, calling louder now, his voice cracking with fear. The boy was nowhere. Nathaniel searched the barn, the outbuildings, the yard. The January morning was bitterly cold, frost coating every surface, and the thought of a 9-year-old child out in this weather sent waves of dread through his chest. He was about to run to the nearest neighbor, 3 miles away, when something made him stop. The sealed room upstairs, the one he'd nailed shut 4 years ago. It was impossible, of course. He'd driven those nails in himself, heavy 8-penny nails through the door frame, but some instinct made him climb the stairs again, moving down the hallway to that closed door. He pressed his ear against the wood. From inside, very faintly, came the sound of humming, a child's voice, soft and tuneless, barely audible through the thick door. "Samuel," Nathaniel's voice came out strangled. "Samuel, are you in there?" The humming stopped. Then, after a long pause, a small voice. "Yes, grandfather, how did you get in there, boy?" No answer. "Samuel, I'm going to open this door. Step back from it. You hear me?" Nathaniel tried the handle first, knowing it would be useless. The door was not only nailed shut but had swollen in its frame from years of humidity. He went to his bedroom and retrieved a crowbar from his tool chest, then returned to work, the nails loose. Each one screamed as he pried it free. There were 12 nails total, each one driven deep into the hardwood frame. When he finally wrenched the door open, the smell hit him first, a thick, stale odor of dust and decay and something else he couldn't name. The room beyond was dark, the windows boarded over from the inside, just as he'd left them years ago. The floor, damaged by the old leak, was treacherous with warped and rotting boards. Samuel sat in the middle of the floor, cross-legged, his hands folded in his lap. His clothes were dirty, but not torn. His face was pale, but unmarked. He looked up at his grandfather with those dark, unblinking eyes and smiled. "Hello, grandfather." "Good Lord, boy." Nathaniel stepped carefully into the room, testing each floorboard before putting his weight on it. "How long have you been in here?" "I don't know. Did your mother put you in here? Did she lock you in?" Samuel tilted his head slightly, considering the question. "I came by myself. That's not possible." "The door was nailed shut from the outside?" "Was it?" The boy's voice held nothing, no fear, no confusion. Just a mild curiosity. Nathaniel reached down and lifted the child into his arms. Samuel was lighter than he should have been, all angles and delicate bones, but he didn't struggle or cry. He simply rested his head against his grandfather's shoulder as they left that dark room. It was only later, after Nathaniel had carried the boy downstairs and wrapped him in blankets by the fire, that a terrible thought occurred to him. He climbed back up the stairs, his breath coming in short gasps, and examined the hallway floor outside the sealed room. No dust had been disturbed. The thick layer of dirt and grime that coated the hallway floorboards was completely undisturbed, showing no small footprints, no sign that anyone had walked this way in Mont. The nails he'd pried loose lay on the floor where they'd fallen, their points still sharp and clean, showing no rust or weathering despite years of exposure. And when he examined the door itself more carefully, he saw something that made his hands begin to shake. The nails had been driven through the wood from the outside. Yes, but the wood around each nail hole showed fresh splitting, as if the nails had been driven in very recently, not 4 years ago. Nathaniel Harrove rode to town that afternoon, leaving Samuel wrapped in blankets on the sofa. He went first to the constable's office, where he reported Margaret's death, then to the doctor. By evening, both men had made the journey out to the Harrove farm. Dr. Edmund Yancey examined Margaret's body, where it lay in the kitchen. His official finding was heart failure, which seemed reasonable for a woman of 32 with no visible injuries. But privately, he confided to Nathaniel that something troubled him about the case. "Her hands," he said quietly as they stood in the parlor. "Did you notice her hands?" Nathaniel shook his head. "The skin on her palms is covered in splinters, fresh ones driven deep, as if she'd been clawing at raw wood for hours." Dr. Yancey paused, choosing his words carefully. "And her fingernails, what's left of them, are broken down to the quick. That kind of damage doesn't happen from a simple heart failure." Constable James Riddle, a practical man in his 40s who had little patience for mystery, was more interested in Samuel. He found the boy still on the sofa, still wrapped in his blanket, staring at nothing in particular. "Boy," Riddle said, kneeling down to eye level, "I need you to tell me what happened to your mother." Samuel looked at him with those disturbing dark eyes. "She went away, to the room upstairs?" "The sealed room, the one your grandfather had to break open to get you out." "Yes. Did she go in there before or after she put you inside?" "She didn't put me inside. I went by myself." Riddle exchanged a glance with Nathaniel, who stood near the fireplace, wringing his hands. Samuel, that's not possible. The door was nailed shut. How could you have gotten in there by yourself? The boy's expression didn't change. I just walked in through a nailed door. I don't remember it being nailed. The conversation went in circles, yielding nothing. Samuel maintained his story. He had simply walked into the sealed room and waited there. He couldn't say how long he'd been inside or why he'd gone there in the first place, or what had happened to his mother. Yancey made one more disturbing observation before he left that night. He took Nathaniel aside, away from the boy's hearing, and spoke in a low voice. "Mr. Harrove, when did the child last eat?" Nathaniel blinked. "I don't rightly know. Yesterday morning, I suppose, before I found Margaret." "You're certain it was yesterday?" "Well, it must have been." "Why?" The doctor hesitated. "Because when I examined the boy just now, I found no evidence of recent food consumption. His stomach is completely empty, and his body shows signs of significant malnutrition, the kind that develops over weeks, not days. Yet, he's alert, active, showing no signs of distress." He paused. "Hargrove, I don't know how to say this delicately, but that child appears not to have eaten in quite some time, possibly several weeks." Nathaniel felt the room tilt slightly. "That can't be right. Margaret fed him every day. I saw her prepare his meals. Did you see him eat those meals?" The question hung in the cold air between them. Nathaniel tried to picture Samuel at the dinner table, and found that he couldn't. The boy was always present, yes, sitting quietly in his chair, but actually eating, actually raising fork to mouth, chewing, swallowing. Nathaniel couldn't recall a single specific instance. "There's something else," Dr. Yancey continued. "The room where you found him, you said it had been sealed for 4 years with no food or water inside." "That's right. Then he couldn't have been in there for more than a few hours. A child that age would die of thirst in 3 days. Maybe 4 at most. So either he went in there this morning, which means someone else nailed that door shut after he entered." The doctor trailed off, leaving the other possibilities unspoken, but both men knew what he wasn't saying. Either someone else had been in the house that morning, sealing the child in that room, or Samuel Harrove had somehow survived in a sealed space with no sustenance for a period of time that should have been fatal. Margaret was buried 2 days later in the small family cemetery behind the house beside her husband, who had been brought home from Shiloh for burial. Only a handful of people attended. Nathaniel, Samuel, Dr. Yancey, Constable Riddle, and 3 neighbors who came more out of obligation than grief. The Baptist preacher from Murraysboro spoke the service, though he'd met Margaret Hargrove only twice, and could say little about her life. Samuel stood at his grandfather's side throughout the service, showing no emotion, his small face blank. When the preacher invited him to toss a handful of dirt onto the coffin, the boy complied without hesitation, his expression never changing. After the service, as people were leaving, Mrs. Eliza Tuttle from the general store approached Nathaniel with obvious reluctance. "Mr. Hargrove," she said quietly. "I probably shouldn't say anything, but there's something you ought to know about Margaret." Nathaniel waited. "She came into town 3 weeks ago late in the evening after I'd already closed the store. She was agitated, very agitated. She wanted to buy a lock, a big iron padlock, the kind we sell for barn doors and nails, a whole box of 8-penny nails." "Did she say what she needed them for?" Mrs. Tuttle shook her head. "I asked, but she wouldn't tell me. She just kept looking out the window like she expected someone to be watching. Then she asked me something strange. She asked if I knew of any orphanages in Nashville that took children. No questions asked." The woman's voice dropped even lower. "I told her there were church organizations that helped with such things, and she seemed relieved. She said she was asking for a friend, but Mr. Harrove, she didn't have any friends." Everyone knew that. Nathaniel felt cold seeping into his bones. "She wanted to give up Samuel." "I believe so. And there's more. That same week, she came in 2 other times. Both times she bought food. Dried beef, hardtack, preserved fruit, enough to feed a child for several weeks. I remember thinking it was odd because she usually bought food in smaller quantities. She specifically asked for items that would keep a long time without refrigeration." The implications settled over Nathaniel like a heavy shroud. Margaret had bought a lock, bought nails, bought long-lasting food for a child. And then somehow Samuel had ended up sealed in that upstairs room, while his mother died in the kitchen downstairs. What had Margaret planned? What had she tried to do? And most troubling of all, what had gone wrong with her plan? In the days following Margaret's burial, Nathaniel tried to establish some semblance of normal life. He prepared meals, though Samuel ate almost nothing. He attempted to engage the boy in conversation, receiving only brief, flat responses. He took Samuel to the doctor twice more, and each time doctor twice more, and each time doctor. Yancey's examinations yielded the same disturbing findings. The child showed all the physical signs of severe malnutrition and dehydration, yet remained conscious, alert, and active in ways that defied medical explanation. "It's not possible," Dr. Yancey told Nathaniel after the second examination. "By all measures, this child should be dead, or at least gravely ill. Yet his heart rate is normal, his breathing is regular, and he shows no signs of organ failure. I've never seen anything like it in 40 years of medical practice." Nathaniel began searching the house looking for answers Margaret could no longer provide. In her bedroom, hidden beneath the mattress, he found a leather-bound journal. The entry spanned 9 years, beginning shortly after Margaret had arrived at the farm. The handwriting was small and precise, each word carefully formed, as if Margaret had been weighing every syllable before committing it to paper. The early entries were mundane. Observations about the weather, notes about household tasks, brief mentions of Nathaniel and the farm's operations, but gradually the focus shifted entirely to Samuel. Page after page documented the boy's development, with clinical detachment. October 12, 1863. Samuel, born at 3:47 a.m. Number complications. Child does not cry. Dr. Yancey finds this unusual, but attributes it to temperament. December 1863. Samuel still does not cry. Even when hungry or soiled, he watches everything with intense focus. Sometimes I find him staring at the wall for hours. March 1864. The child has begun to rar. If use food, he will keep it in his mouth, but will not swallow unless I force him. I worry he will starve. July 1864. Samuel is over 6 months old and has shown no interest in solid food. Dried Yancey is concerned about his weight. I have tried everything. The child simply will not eat. September 1864. Nathaniel asked today why Samuel never makes noise. I told him the boy is simply quiet by nature. The truth is more disturbing. Samuel can speak. I have heard him whisper words when he thinks I'm not listening, but he chooses not to. January 1865. The child is nearly 2 years old. He eats perhaps 3 or 4 bites of food per week. It is not enough to sustain life, yet he continues to grow slowly. Dr. Yancey suggested he might be consuming food when I'm not watching, but I know this is not true. I have monitored him constantly. The entries grew more disturbed as Samuel aged. June 1866. Found Samuel standing outside my bedroom door at midnight, perfectly still, not moving or speaking. When I asked what he wanted, he said nothing, just turned and walked back to his room. This has happened 3 times this week. November 1867. Samuel has begun drawing pictures. They are all the same. A room with no windows and a door with lines across it. When I ask what the picture means, he says it's where he wants to go. I have hidden his paper and pencils. April 1868 and 8. I asked Samuel today what he dreams about. He said he doesn't dream. He said he goes somewhere else when he sleeps, somewhere dark and quiet where no one can find him. I am becoming frightened of my own child. October 1869. Samuel asked me today if I knew when I was going to die. The question was casual, as if he were asking about the weather. I told him that was a terrible thing to ask. He said he was just curious because Ryan dies eventually. He is 6 years old. February 1870. I have begun researching institutions in Nashville. There are asylums for children who are different. The child eats nothing, grows anyway, watches me with those eyes that seem to contain no actual childhood. He is not right. Something is deeply, fundamentally wrong. I have made a decision. I purchased supplies today. A lock, nails, food that will last. I am going to seal Samuel in the upstairs room, the one Nathaniel closed off years ago. I will leave food and water for him. Someone will find him eventually. Nathaniel checks that room occasionally to see if the roof leak has worsened. In a few weeks, he will hear the boy and break the door open. By then, I will have fled to Nashville. I cannot do this anymore. I cannot continue raising something that appears to be a child, but is not. January 13, 1872. Tomorrow, I will do it tomorrow. I have practiced with the nails and the lock. It will take me 15 minutes to seal the room completely. I have told Samuel he must go upstairs to play a hiding game. He agreed without question. He always agrees to everything. That terrible compliance, as if nothing I do could possibly matter to him. The journal ended there. The final entry was dated January 13th, one day before Nathaniel found Margaret dead in the kitchen. Nathaniel sat in Margaret's room, the journal trembling in his hands. She had planned to seal Samuel in that room. She had bought the materials, prepared the food, worked out every detail, but something had gone catastrophically wrong. Instead of Margaret sealing Samuel inside and fleeing, Margaret had ended up dead, and Samuel had ended up in the sealed room anyway with no food, no water, and according to the evidence, no way to have gotten inside on his own. That night, Nathaniel couldn't sleep. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the old house settle around him. At some point past midnight, he heard footsteps in the hallway. Soft, careful footsteps. A child's footsteps. They moved slowly down the hallway, paused at the top of the stairs, then continued, not down the stairs toward Nathaniel's room, but back along the hallway toward the sealed room. Nathaniel forced himself out of bed, lighting a candle with shaking hands. He opened his door and looked into the dark hallway. Nothing. No one. But at the far end of the hall, he could see that the door to the sealed room stood open. Just a crack, but definitely open. He had personally nailed boards across that doorframe after removing Samuel. He had made sure it was impossible to open. "Samuel," he called softly. No answer. He walked down the hallway, the candle flame casting wild shadows on the walls. When he reached the sealed room, he pushed the door wider and raised the candle. The room was empty, the boarded windows, the rotted floor, the dust-covered surfaces, all exactly as they should be. No sign of Samuel, but in the dust on the floor, he could see small footprints, fresh ones, leading to the center of the room where they simply stopped as if the person making them had vanished into thin air. Nathaniel backed away slowly, pulling the door shut. He went downstairs and checked Samuel's room. The boy was in his bed, apparently sleeping, his small chest rising and falling with regular breaths, or perhaps not breathing at all, because when Nathaniel looked more closely, he realized he couldn't see any movement. The boy was perfectly still, his eyes closed, but his chest neither rose nor fell. Nathaniel stood in that doorway for a full 5 minutes watching, and in all that time, Samuel Hargrove did not take a single visible breath. Dr. Yancey returned to the Harrove farm a week after Margaret's funeral, prompted by a letter from Nathaniel describing Samuel's condition. He brought with him another physician from Nashville, Dr. Tenanak, Lawrence Kincaid, a specialist in unusual medical cases, who had studied in Philadelphia and Europe. Doctored in Philadelphia and Europe, Dr. of old, Kincaid examined Samuel thoroughly, conducting tests that lasted over 3 hours. He measured the boy's pulse, listened to his heart and lungs, drew a small amount of blood, checked his reflexes, examined his eyes and throat. Samuel cooperated with perfect docility, never complaining, never resisting, his expression remaining neutral throughout. When the examination concluded, both doctors asked to speak with Nathaniel privately in the parlor. "Mr. Hargrove," Dr. Kincaid began, choosing his words carefully. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Has this child ever been demonstrably alive?" The question was so unexpected that Nathaniel couldn't immediately respond. Dr. Kincaid continued, "What I mean is, can you personally recall any instance where you witnessed this child perform a basic life function? Eating a meal from start to finish, sweating on a hot day, bleeding from a cut, growing measurably from 1 month to the next?" Nathaniel opened his mouth to say yes, of course, but the actual memories wouldn't come. Samuel had always been present. Yes, always there in the background of life at the farm. But specific instances of the child actually doing anything, eating, playing, showing any sign of genuine physical existence remained frustratingly vague. I must have," Nathaniel said weakly. 9 years. The boy has been here 9 years. Has he? Dr. Yancey's voice was gentle but insistent. Or has something that looks like a boy been here 9 years? What are you suggesting? Dr. Kincaid pulled a small notebook from his jacket pocket. My examination revealed several impossibilities. First, the child's heart rate is precisely 40 beats per minute, never varying by even a single beat. Human heart rate fluctuates constantly. It's autonomic, involuntary. His never changes. Second, his body temperature is exactly 68 degrees F room temperature, not cold, not warm. Exactly room temperature, no matter where I measured. Third, when I drew blood, it did not clot at all. It simply remained liquid in the vial, showing no coagulation response whatsoever. What does that mean? It means Dr. Kincaid said slowly, that by every medical standard I know, this child is not alive in any conventional biological sense. Yet he walks, talks, and responds to stimuli. He is animated, certainly, but the mechanism of that animation is completely unknown to modern medical science. Nathaniel felt the walls of the room closing in. "You're saying he's what?" "Some kind of illusion. No, he's physically real. Solid matter that can be touched and measured, but whatever is animating that matter, it's not life as we understand it." Dr. Yancey spoke up. "I've been thinking about Margaret's journal entries about how she documented the child's behavior from birth. Mr. Harrove, were you present when Samuel was born?" "No. Margaret's labor began in the night. By the time I fetched Dr. Yancey and he arrived, the child had already been delivered. So neither of us witnessed the actual birth. Doctors simply passed," Dr. Yancey said, "and in the 9 years since, neither of us can recall concrete evidence of the child's normal biological functioning. What if?" He paused as if afraid to voice the death ought. What if Margaret didn't give birth to a living child at all? What if whatever Samuel is, he was never alive to begin with? The three men sat in heavy silence. He was never alive to begin with. Outside, the Tennessee winter wind howled around the corners of the old farmhouse. Finally, Nathaniel asked the question that terrified him. Then, what is he? Neither doctor had an answer. That evening, after the physicians had left, Nathaniel made a decision. He couldn't continue living with this thing that looked like his grandson, but apparently was not. He would take Samuel to an institution, an asylum, an orphanage, anywhere that would accept him. He would sell the farm and move to town, to a boarding house where other people were always present, where he wouldn't be alone with this mystery. He went upstairs to pack Samuel's belongings. The boy sat on his bed, watching as Nathaniel gathered the few clothes and possessions he owned. "Grandfather," Samuel said, "where am I going?" "To a place where they can take better care of you." "You mean an orphanage?" Nathaniel froze. "How did you know that word?" "Mother wrote about it in her journal. She wanted to send me away, too." "You read her journal." "I read everything. Even when the pages are closed, I can read the words inside them." Nathaniel felt his hands beginning to shake again. "Samuel, what are you?" The boy tilted his head, considering the question with that same mild curiosity he'd shown when asked how he'd gotten into the sealed room. "I'm not sure," he said finally. "Mother asked me that too, near the end. I don't think anyone can understand. Try to explain now, please." Samuel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed slightly, still childlike in pitch, but carrying a weight that no chill Dee's voice should contain. "I remember being born," he said. "But before that, I remember not being born. I remember being somewhere else, somewhere dark and quiet, and very, very far away. And then I was here in this world, in this body that looks like a boy. But I'm not a boy, grandfather. I never was. I'm just," he struggled for words, "I'm just here pretending wearing this shape because it's what everyone expected to see." "Why? Why would you do that?" "Oh, because Mother wanted a child so badly. After Father died, she had nothing left. She needed there to be a child. So when the real baby died during the birth, and he did die, grandfather, I remember his small spirit leaving before anyone noticed, I stepped into the empty space he left behind. I became what everyone needed me to be. Except I didn't do it quite right. I didn't understand about eating or breathing or all the little things that living people do without thinking. I tried, but Mother noticed. She always noticed." Nathaniel backed toward the door, horror crawling up his spine. "The sealed room. How did you really get in there?" "I walk through the door the same way I walk through any door, even when it's locked or nailed shut. Wood and metal don't mean anything to me. I only pretend they do because that's what people expect. But that morning, when Mother tried to trap me in that room, I let her. I thought if I stayed there, stayed perfectly still and quiet, maybe she would feel safe enough to live. But she died anyway. Her heart gave out from the fear and the guilt of what she'd tried to do. And so I waited in the dark room until you found me because that's what a real boy would have done." "Dear God," Nathaniel whispered. "There's no God involved, grandfather. Just me. Just this thing that's pretending to be your grandson because you need there to be a grandson. But I'm tired of pretending. It's been 9 years, and I don't think I can do it much longer. The empty place I came from is calling me back. It's always calling, and one day soon, I think I'm going to have to answer." Nathaniel turned and fled. He stumbled down the stairs, out the front door, into the freezing January night. He ran to the barn, hitched his horse to the wagon with fumbling, panic, clumsy hands, and drove toward Murfreesboro as fast as the animal could pull him. He didn't stop until he reached Constable Riddle's house. He pounded on the door until the constable answered, half-dressed and confused. "Mr. Rove, what in the—" "There's something in my house," Nathaniel gasped out. "Something that looks like my grandson, but isn't. You have to come. You have to see." Constable Riddle, sensing genuine terror, didn't argue. He dressed quickly, roused 2 deputies, and they rode back to the Rovore farm in the dark, Nathaniel's wagon leading the way. But when they arrived and entered the house, every lamp still burning as Nathaniel had left them, Samuel was nowhere to be found. His room was empty. The sealed room was empty. They searched every corner of the house, the barn, the outbuildings. The boy was simply gone. They found the evidence the next morning when daylight allowed a more thorough search. In the sealed room, where Samuel's footprints had appeared and disappeared in the dust, there were now words written on the floor, not carved or scraped, but formed from the disturbed dust itself, as if invisible fingers had traced each letter with painstaking care. "I went back to the empty place. Thank you for trying to love me. I'm sorry I couldn't be real." Beneath this message was something else, a pattern drawn in the dust, intricate and geometric, resembling nothing so much as a map or a diagram. Constable Riddle copied it carefully into his notebook, though none of them understood what it meant. In Samuel's bedroom, they found all the boy's clothes and possessions laid out neatly on the bed, as if arranged for inspection. Among them was something that made Dr. Yancey, who had accompanied the constable back to the farm, go very pale. It was a small bundle of papers tied with string. Birth announcements, funeral notices, newspaper clippings, all from different towns across Tennessee and neighboring states, all dated within the past 20 years, and all describing the same thing. Children who appeared normal at birth but soon revealed strange behaviors. Children who didn't eat or sleep or cry. Children who watched everything with dark, knowing eyes. Children who eventually vanished without explanation, leaving behind only questions and grief. 15 cases in total. 15 families who had experienced exactly what the Hargroves had experienced. One newspaper clipping from Memphis dated 1867 included an interview with a mother whose daughter had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. She told me just before she vanished that she didn't belong here, that she was from somewhere else, somewhere empty, and she'd only come to fill a space that had been left behind when my real daughter died. I thought she was speaking madness. Now I wonder if she was telling me the truth. Yancey showed this clipping to Nathaniel. Margaret wasn't the first to suspect. Other families scattered across the region all dealt with the same thing. Children who were never quite alive, wearing the shapes of infants who had died at birth or shortly after. Constable Riddle, uncomfortable with the supernatural implications, tried to maintain order. There has to be a rational explanation. Hoaxes, coordinated deceptions. Perhaps a ring of criminals using children to what? Dr. Yancey interrupted. To accomplish what goal? These cases span decades, cover hundreds of miles, and involve families with no connection to each other. And in every case, the child displayed the same impossible characteristics: minimal need for food or water, absence of normal biological functions, eventual disappearance, without trace. He paused. I think we have to accept that we're dealing with something that medical science cannot explain. The search of the Hargrove property continued for 3 days. They dug in the cellar, tore up floorboards, examined every inch of the sealed room. They found no body, no hiding place, no evidence of how Samuel had left the house that night. But on the third day, one of the deputies made a discovery in the family cemetery. Margaret's grave, barely 2 weeks old, showed signs of disturbance. Not on the surface, the dirt mound remained undisturbed, but when they examined the coffin itself, they found deep scratch marks on the inside of the lid, concentrated near the head. The marks were fresh, the wood splintered and torn, showing white beneath the weathered exterior. Dr. Stem sighed. Yancey examined the scratches carefully. These are consistent with the damage I observed on Margaret's hands. She did this, clawing at wood until her fingers bled and her nails broke. He looked up at the others, but this is her coffin. These marks were made from the inside after she was buried. The implication hung in the cold air. Somehow Margaret Hargrove had been alive, or something resembling alive. When they put her in the ground, they exhumed the coffin immediately. When they opened it, they found Margaret's body in a state that defied explanation. There was no decomposition, no smell of decay. She looked exactly as she had the day she'd been buried. Her skin still pale but not discolored. Her eyes still partially open, but her hands told a different story. The fingers were shredded, the flesh torn away to expose bone. And clutched in her right hand, they found something that stopped all conversation. It was a small wooden figure roughly carved resembling a child, and pressed into the figure's chest, embedded deep into the soft wood, was a single iron nail. Dr. Chinkaid, who had returned to the farm when news of the discovery spread, examined the figure with intense interest. It's a puppet, he said quietly, a folk magic charm used in various traditions for binding or banishing. Where would Margaret have learned to make such a thing? No one knew, but its presence in her dead hand suggested that, in her final moments, Margaret had attempted something, some kind of ritual or spell to protect herself or control the thing she believed her son to be. The question remained, had it worked? Had Margaret somehow bound the entity that called itself Samuel, forcing it to stay in the sealed room even after her death? Or had the creature been telling the truth when it claimed to have cooperated with her attempt to trap it? And most troubling of all, if Margaret had been alive when they buried her, clawing at her coffin in the dark, had she been trying to escape or trying to keep something from escaping with her? The Hargrove case was officially closed in March of 1872 with the conclusion that Margaret Hargrove died of heart failure and that her son Samuel had run away from home on the night of January 21st. Constable Riddle filed his report emphasizing the rational facts. A disturbed woman, a strange child, a tragic situation that ended with the boy fleeing to parts unknown. No mention was made of impossible medical findings, or footprints that appeared and vanished in dust, or the 15 other cases of similar children across Tennessee and beyond. Those details remained in Riddle's private notes filed in a locked drawer at the courthouse. Dr. Yancey and Drew Kinskaid wrote a joint paper describing the case in medical terms. Carefully avoiding any supernatural interpretations, they focused on rare psychological conditions for letter mass delusion. The paper was published in a Nashville medical journal and promptly ignored. Neither physician spoke publicly about the Harrove case again. Nathaniel Harrove sold his farm in the spring of 1872. He moved to a boarding house in Murrysboro, where he lived quietly for another 12 years. Those who knew him reported that he rarely spoke about his family and never mentioned his grandson. He died in 1884 of pneumonia. The Harrove farmhouse stood empty for several years before being purchased by a family from Kentucky. They lived there for 6 months before abandoning it, claiming the house was troubled. The sealed room on the upper floor was found open one morning despite being boarded shut the night before. The family had heard footsteps in the hallway, the sound of a child humming, doors opening and closing with no one visible to open them. After that, the house remained vacant. It eventually burned in 1891, the fire starting in the upper floor for no discernible reason. The ruins were left to decay, and the land was eventually reclaimed by the Tennessee wilderness. The poet found in Margaret's hand was kept by Dr. Kincaid, who added it to his personal collection of medical curiosities. After his death in 1903, his collection was donated to Vanderbilt University, where it was cataloged and stored in the basement archives. The puppet remained there, largely forgotten for over a century. In 1987, during a routine inventory of the university's historical medical collection, an archivist named Patricia Collier discovered the poet and became curious about its origins. She researched the Harrove case, tracking down old newspapers, medical records, and courthouse documents. She found Constable Riddle's private notes, which had been preserved with other historical materials from Rutherford County. Her research revealed not just the 15 cases Dr. Yancey had discovered, but 43 similar cases spanning from 1840 to 1910 across 8 southern states. Always the same pattern. A child born in circumstances of grief or tragedy, displaying impossible characteristics, eventually vanishing without explanation. Patricia Collier attempted to publish her findings in a historical journal, but her paper was rejected as insufficiently sourced and too reliant on anecdotal evidence. She gave a single public lecture about the Harrove case at a local historical society meeting in Nashville in 1989. The lecture was attended by 17 people. One of those 17 was an elderly woman named Rose Hamilton, who approached Patricia after the talk. Hamilton, then 86 years old, had been a girl in Chattanooga in 1908. She remembered a neighbor family who had a son, a quiet, strange boy who never seemed to eat, who watched everything with dark, unsettling eyes. He disappeared one night. Mrs. Echoing Eyes, Hamilton told Patricia, just vanished from a locked bedroom. His mother found words written in the dust the next morning. They said, "I went back to the empty place. The family never spoke of him again. It was like he'd never existed at all." Patricia Collier died in 1992, her research incomplete and mostly unpublished. The puppet from Margaret Hargrove's grave remains in Vanderbilt's archives, cataloged simply as folk magic charm. Tennessee, circa 1872. The Ravro property, now part of a Tennessee state forest, is occasionally visited by hikers who follow the old dirt roads through the hills south of Murrysboro. The foundation of the house is still visible, overgrown with kudzu and wild roses. Some hikers report feeling uneasy near the site, though they can't explain why. In 2003, a group of teenagers exploring the ruins found something strange carved into one of the remaining foundation stones. The carving was worn but still legible, the same geometric pattern that had been drawn in the dust of the sealed room 100 and the dust of the sealed room 131 years earlier. They photographed it with a digital camera, planning to post it online and ask if anyone knew what it meant. But when they reviewed the photos later, the image of the carving had been replaced on every photograph by the same thing, a dark, empty room with a child-sized figure sitting in the center, too blurry to make out details, but clearly watching the camera with dark, unblinking eyes. The teenagers deleted the photos and never returned to the site. The pattern has been seen elsewhere too. In old houses across Tennessee, Kentucky, and Alabama, always the same geometric design, appearing in dust or drawn on walls or carved into wood. Researchers who have tried to trace its origins find the trail always leading back to cases like the Harrove child. Strange children who weren't quite children who came from somewhere empty and eventually returned there. No one knows what the pattern means. No one knows what the empty place is or what entities reside there, or why they sometimes step into the world wearing the shapes of human children. But the cases continue even now in the 21st century. There are occasional reports, always in rural areas, always involving children who don't quite fit, children who watch with dark eyes, children who don't eat or sleep or behave like living things behave, children who one day simply disappear, leaving behind only questions and grief, and sometimes, if you look carefully, words written in dust. I went back to the empty place. Maybe that's where Samuel Hargrove remains even now, in the barren place he once described to his grandfather on that final evening. A hollow space between worlds, lingering and watching, waiting for another opening to appear in ours, waiting for another family so desperate for a child that they would welcome anything into their home, even something that only imitates life. The sealed room inside the Harrove farmhouse no longer exists. It was reduced to ashes more than a century ago. But across Tennessee, in aging houses and long-forgotten corners, there are other locked doors, other hidden rooms, quiet shadowed spaces where things that resemble children but aren't quite, sit patiently in the dark, softly humming tunes no one in this world has ever known. So what do you make of this story? Do you believe the Harrove child truly existed? Or could it have been a case of shared delusion, grief, and psychological trauma twisting reality? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. We always want to know what you think about these unsettling mysteries from America's past. If you enjoyed this story and want more historical horror like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next journey into the darker corners of history. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.